Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Friedhoff. I'm going to be going over Chapter 6, Photosynthesis. And this is for a biology class intended for like ninth and 10th grade students. So we're going to be talking about and trying to transitioning our way away from cells in the last couple chapters to different processes within the cell. We've talked about chloroplast before, and we've talked about mitochondria before. Both of these are going to be found in eukaryotic cells. The one we're going to focus on in this chapter is chloroplast, and specifically within chloroplast, the process of photosynthesis. So again, we're moving away from cells, we're moving to different processes that are really important for life. So that being said, we're going to jump into photosynthesis, and you can see by this meme, we're going to be talking about how plants intake light and use that energy to make their own food. And we tend to know these organisms as autotrophs. We also know these organisms as producers, but we tend to like to use the word autotroph, auto meaning self. So they make food for themselves. And they do this by getting the sun's energy from light, and they utilize that energy to make their own food. Now, the one really big important aspect of this is they're not actually getting mass from the sun. Don't think they're getting any like weight from the sun. They're using the weight from the carbon dioxide they take in, but they are getting energy from the sun, not mass. We aren't autotrophs. We are heterotrophs. Let me go back here. We are heterotrophs. We eat other things for food. You can see, again, these are all examples of heterotrophs. Even bacteria are heterotrophs. They eat other things. Some bacteria can be photosynthetic, but we're just talking about organisms that eat other things for nourishment for food. These are also known as consumers. I like to show this kind of uh, diagram that shows, again, the energy from the sun being transferred into the autotrophs and then eventually to the heterotrophs. And all of this will be then broken down further by decomposers. So there's a relationship between all of these species in all these levels. Now, we're going to look at photosynthesis a little bit more in depth in this class. Not too much in depth, but we are going to look at how photosynthesis is different from cellular respiration in mitochondria. And basically, this is just the biological process that converts light energy from the sun into chemical energy in the form of carbohydrates. You can see we're going to intake carbon dioxide, water, and light, and make sugar and oxygen. This is what that process then looks like. You can see again in the plants, we typically take in light from the sun, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and water from the roots, and we make carbohydrates and oxygen. We're going to talk about this whole process a little bit more in depth in the next couple sections, but this is the end of section 1. All right, now we're going to get into the inputs and outputs of photosynthesis in chapter 6.2. All right, so we have these things called stomata. These are openings, or they look kind of like mouths of plants, and they're found typically on the underside of leaves. This is where gas exchange occurs. This is where the plants are going to take in some of their inputs. Inputs from, think about in, meaning that they're going to take them in and actually use them. Outputs are like the products. This is what they produce. So these are, again, this is how the plant actually kind of breathes. They can open and close these stomata and allow for gas exchange to occur. Now, these stomata are going to be where the plants, again, take in carbon dioxide, and they're going to allow oxygen and water to leave. This is where gas exchange occurs, again, between the plant and the atmosphere, and they take in carbon dioxide and they let out oxygen. This is kind of the opposite of what we do. We take in oxygen, but we breathe out carbon dioxide. The plants kind of do the opposite. They take in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. Now, our next aspect that we're going to be looking at here is where do plants get water from? And they obviously get water from the ground through their roots. But it's a kind of a misconception that they take in water through like their leaves. No, they take in water through their roots. And they do this by that process of osmosis, where the water is traveling from areas of high to low concentration. So again, water comes in through their roots, really important aspect there. Just to end this section, we're talking about the inputs and outputs. The more water, light, and CO2 that is around a plant, the more photosynthesis they can go through. Warmer temperatures also increase photosynthetic rate. So if you look at this map, yeah, we're going to see large amounts of photosynthesis occurring near the equator because it's really warm, there's a lot of light, and there's a lot of water. Towards the poles, you can see where Antarctica is and like Greenland. Yeah, there's not a lot of photosynthesis because it's just too cold. So these are just reactants or inputs that are going to increase the rate of reaction, the rate of photosynthesis towards the equator. That's why we find like rainforest around the equator is because they have large amounts of light, heat, and water. All right, section 3 is going to be about light and pigments, but we're going to remind you that we're in chloroplast within specifically plants. And these chloroplasts are going to be the location of many of the processes that go on during photosynthesis. So again, chloroplast, they're going to be the location where photosynthesis occurs. And remember that photosynthesis is the intake of light and carbon dioxide to make sugar molecules. Now, chloroplasts do this, but they also then make glucose. Glucose is going to be the main product here that's being made. So if we remind you about light, light is obviously energy. It's the energy that we see with light. It can be separated into the visible light spectrum. You can see Roy G. Biv here. So just remember, light equals energy. And what plants are going to do is they're going to use pigments to absorb these wavelengths of light. Now, I like to show you this image here. This is an image of the rainbow, the visible light spectrum, and a certain wavelength of light is being reflected. Now, it's not the one that plants reflect, but it's going to be just helping us understand that plants are going to be absorbing some wavelengths of light, but not absorbing all the wavelengths of light. They use a certain wavelengths of light that they absorb to fuel their processes to make glucose. So again, here's a pigment. You can see it's absorbing light, but it's not absorbing all the wavelengths of light. Now, the plants are going to use chlorophyll specifically. This is the main pigment, and they're going to use this to absorb a lot of the reds, blues, and purples. If you see, they're not absorbing green colors very well, so they are actually going to reflect those. And again, this chlorophyll molecule is going to be found in chloroplast. This is actually what it looks like, and it's found in these membranes we find in the chloroplast. So this is the chlorophyll molecule. So this is a pigment. It's going to absorb, again, the reds, blues, and purples, but not the greens. So this is why we see plants as being green instead of other colors. I make the analogy that chlorophyll is like a solar panel. It's going to absorb the light and then transfer it to other things. And in class, I like to show the Billy Madison, but I won't show it here because I'll probably get copyrighted by YouTube. So again, chlorophyll doesn't absorb much green light. It reflects green light. That's why plants appear green. And there are some scientific reasons why it doesn't absorb green, but just remember that plants absorb everything else but green and reflect, and that's why we see plants as being green. This is, again, you can see it's absorbing the other wavelengths, and this is why plants appear green. Now, there are other pigments in plants. There are like anthocyanins, they have like the carotenoids. They do absorb other wavelengths, and not every plant is green. And this is why plants aren't green in the fall, is because they stop producing this chlorophyll molecule, and we can see other pigments, but the plants use a host of pigments, but chlorophyll is the main one. I'm not going to show you these videos, but I'm going to end with this section with a good meme. Are you hungry? I could use a light snack. Good meme. All right, this is going to be our last section in chapter 6 on photosynthesis. And this is basically we're going to dive just a little bit deeper into the processes within photosynthesis. So remember that photosynthesis takes in sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water and makes sugar and oxygen. In this case, the main product here is to make sugar. Oxygen's a byproduct here. The plant isn't making us oxygen. It's not like its main purpose. It's a byproduct. When we say byproduct, it's like what's left over. So don't think it's making us oxygen necessarily for us, but we do use that oxygen. Its main goal is to make sugar, which it's going to use for energy or for food. A majority of the mass of a plant does come from the CO2, not the ground. A lot of people think that the ground supplies the plant with like its mass, but it's actually atmosphere. The atmosphere is where it takes in this CO2 and make it into the sugar molecules that it's going to use for like cellulose and the starches that we find in plants. But again, the plant uses CO2 for the carbon it's going to use to make all of those structures. Now, the main enzyme that's used here is called ribisco. Ribisco, you can see here, is the enzyme. It's going to take a molecule called RUBP and bind it with CO2 to make sugar. Now, this is the most abundant enzyme on Earth because there are so many plants, and this is a kind of a slow molecule. It takes a while for this reaction to occur. So there's a lot of it in plants. So there's a lot of plants. There's a lot of this in plants. So yeah, it's the most abundant enzyme on Earth. But I need you to know from this is This is the enzyme that takes CO2 and basically makes sugar. Lastly, we're just going to kind of mention the carbon cycle. This is a part of the carbon cycle where a lot of different processes are going to emit CO2, but photosynthesis takes that back in and makes it into sugar. So essentially, the autotrophs take in CO2 and the heterotrophs produce CO2, and there is a cycling of this carbon between these two types of organisms. This is going to be the end of chapter 6.